to the latest episode of the UK Glamping podcast, hosted by us here at Glamptect. This week we are focusing on some of the steps that are necessary once you've finally got that all-important approval for your project. So with that in mind, our special guest this week is Gary Finnie, Director of GFM Scot Limited. Thank you very much for joining us, Gary.
Hi, thanks for asking me. Pleasure.
No, our pleasure, absolutely. So, Gary, can you give our listeners and viewers a little bit of a background about what it is you do?
Yes, we specialise really in installation of garden room and glamping pods, and with that, every trade associated with them. So we can offer, mainly for your glamping site clients, we can offer a full turnkey service from greenfield to open doors. We install all infrastructure. We look into all types of resources like solar and how you're getting your water, where your civils and all your sewerage and everything is all going, and we can install all that right up to installation of the pod, construction of pods if they have to be brought in flat pack for bad access, and fencing, signage, decking, balustrades, so the whole lot, the whole spectrum of setting up a glamping site.
So, a man with a finger in many different pies, then, in that respect.
Yes,
Some of them are a little bit less sexy than others. I mean, it's never fun to talk about sewage, but it is a necessary part of the project.
No, it's very important. We're either linking into mains or we're setting up sewage treatment plants in itself or septic tanks, but never sexy to talk about it, but
No.
It's a vital part of the process.
No, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And it's something that is included in our kind of conversation with our clients right the way along the process. And once, as we say, they get that kind of approval, these are the kind of nitty-gritty bits that become their everyday reality prior to be able to kind of opening their doors. So I think we first met you via one of the trade shows that we were at, and we were discussing kind of ground screws and different bits and pieces. We'll circle back round to that in a little bit, but tell us a little bit about your kind of time in the industry and how you've kind of come to get yourself involved in the glamping trade.
Yeah, well, I started off many years ago. As a young lad, I started in the industry doing groundwork, and it was all about groundworks for me. It was mainly landscaping, but we could do it on a commercial and a domestic basis. So we found ourselves doing patios, driveways, but huge areas of returfing, and it brings you into a multitude of trades in the landscaping actually, because you're doing patios, landscaping, you're also installing drainage. You're then moving on to fencing. You're maybe putting decking, balustrades in. So it kind of, as the years progressed, gave me a sort of vast knowledge of different trades and how it all works. And we just started getting in. I just started getting in. I was always quite ambitious and got into larger and larger projects. And eventually came in the end where I owned my own construction company, possibly. We mainly focused on doing loft conversions, garage conversions, extensions, and again, the full turnkey service.
Mm-hmm.
So it's given me a broad knowledge of the industry, really, and how all aspects, from electricians to plumbers to painters, plasterers, ground workers, operating machinery. So it's given me this vast knowledge of the industry. And at one point, a couple of years ago, I just decided I needed a change in direction, really. And I always fancied the holiday lodge, the glamping site, and I could see that there's a bit of a niche and a bit of a requirement for somebody to have a slightly different view on how we operate within that industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy as a builder to go in and just completely flatten ground and start putting in infrastructure. We're not building houses. We're building somewhere that needs a little bit less development of the land. We need to be a little bit more sympathetic to our environment, keeping trees and bushes and planting that's in around the area, and maybe thinking of how to make paths instead of tar pavements. And this is an escapism rather than a place to live. So it's got to be more environmentally
100%.
Thought about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was right up my street, really.
Perfect. And I think, obviously, for ourselves as a company in Glamptect, super convenient for us to work with you being Scotland based, as we are. But is it just Scotland that you cover, or do you cover the whole of the UK? How far afield do you go?
No, we cover the whole of the UK for larger projects. Obviously, like one or two pods. Everything's obviously got to be financially viable,
Of course.
but we cover the whole of Scotland for our general day to day work. One pod up to 10, 15 pods, whatever. We'll go as far down as Carlisle and Newcastle, the whole of Scotland. So that's our entire catchment area.
Fantastic.
Out with this area is large planned projects, which we would quite happily travel for.
Much like the Avant Glamp project that we've got going on at the moment. Obviously, I believe you're involved with that as well, are you?
Correct. Yeah, I had flown down this week to Birmingham. We're doing the site survey and everything down there, and I'm looking at project managing the site, doing a lot of physical work on the site itself, and just getting that whole thing up and running. And that is, you may be correct me, there's 58 pods in that.
Mhm.
There's the reception area,
Yeah.
large communal areas. It's a huge project.
Yeah, you're going to
Huge
be a busy
project.
little
So
bee with that
yes,
one for sure.
absolutely. But delighted to get involved in it and in such a prestigious, you know,
Yeah,
project as that, and it gives, and it allows me with my flair for doing different things, because it's quite complicated in some of the areas for the lily pad decking area that we have floating over the water.
yeah, that's been
It's just,
much
yeah,
discussed, much
just crack
maligned
on
as
through
it's
that.
come to reality, that one, but I think that's going to look absolutely incredible once it's done. So,
It will do.
at what
Yeah.
stage do you normally get involved with clients? I know I've mentioned obviously that the work starts post approval for our clients, but is that kind of the first point of contact for you normally, or do you tend to initiate that sort of overview earlier?
It depends on how involved. I mean, there's various ways. You're going through the design and pre-planning, and when you're looking at that, it might sometimes, from a commercial point of view, just looking at costings, ask me to get involved at that point as a consultation, so we can look at the design and what the intention is, and we're looking at the slope of the ground, we're looking at all the environmental changes we're going to have to make, and we can put that into a costing study and make that part of your feasibility study. There's a lot of people will get to the planning stage, they'll have past planning, and at no point have they ever had an indication from a builder as to how much this is actually going to cost them.
Yeah, which is a pretty important
So
part of the
sometimes it's
plan.
better
Yeah.
to get to me. Yeah, yeah, and then we'll hit them, with a bit of a reality on the budget. And I have had on the occasion customers having to pull back a little bit and
Hmm.
rethink their plan, maybe do partial part of the plan and then do the other half later as income stream starts creating some savings. But if we were there at the beginning, giving an indication of cost as to what this design is going to add to the budget, then it's quite helpful for your clients.
Oh, 100%. And with that in mind, if anybody's listening is at that stage just now, we will put all of Gary's website details as well as contact information in the description to this episode. So check the description out, and if you're looking for a quote and start those conversations, please feel free to get straight in touch with Gary. So I'd like to circle back round for a moment to something you mentioned there about being sensitive to the landscape, and obviously that the rural nature of these developments obviously presents a different set of challenges to a residential development, in that customers are very keen to maintain the aesthetic of their site whilst any kind of groundworks is going on as much as possible. So one of the big questions we get when we get to the point of discussing units, whether that be pods or shepherd's huts or anything like that, is how they're sited on the land. Because I think it's fair to say that historically a concrete slab was pretty much the go-to for most people. They would have to excavate the land, flatten out a big portion of it, and pour a concrete slab. But we've now obviously seen new technologies and more kind of eco-sensitive technologies like ground screws come to the fore. Can you give us a bit of insight as to kind of how the two of them work and whether or not they both are still needed, or whether one's surpassing the other?
Yeah, yeah, and they both have their place. In my opinion, the first option is to do feasibility study for ground screws. Ground screws, the new technology that's coming in, we ourselves have grasped that by the reins and created a company called Ground Screw Scotland. Um, and with that, we're installing for many different reasons. We're looking at solar panel arrays. We're looking at doing it for the glamping pods, and even signage going up, getting put in with the ground screws and attached to the ground screws through that way. So that to me would be our first option. The huge benefits we have with ground screws is the obvious one: we're not using concrete, and the environmental impact that concrete has on the world from
Yeah,
producing it. We have very highly recyclable ground screws. The good benefit, once they're installed, they don't have an effect on the water table within your land either.
yeah,
Putting in blockades of concrete affecting the direction of travel for the water. The ground screws are only 76 millimetres in diameter, so have very little effect on the surrounding area. When we penetrate the ground and install them, it is only that 76 millimetres that's disturbing the ground. So we don't
fantastic.
have a lot of spoil. We're not bringing any big machinery in.
The effect on the water table is a huge hot button topic at the moment, across especially the south of England at the moment, but it's inevitably coming further north as well. So I presume that's a massive tick in the box for the planning officers as well, because you have less impact. But the ground screw is an option for everybody, or are there instances where they're just not possible?
No, there's instances where they're not possible. They're not drilling. They're simply the way a ground screw works. It goes in like a wood screw does going into timber, and the thread itself grips the soil and pulls itself into the ground. If we come across an obstruction like a large boulder or we're facing rocky ground, it's just not going to be practical to do it. And this is when we do have to try and maybe go back to more traditional methods of doing your concrete slab, or just there are sometimes other ways of doing it in the middle, but predominantly it's the ground screws or concrete slab. But the
Okay,
concrete slab is just as in, if we fail in the ground screws, then we go
yeah.
back to concrete slab.
Makes sense. And I guess one of the other benefits of potentially using ground screws is that there's not quite so much excavation needed. Am I right in thinking that there's an element of self leveling with
Absolutely.
them so they can be used on a slope or a gradient that perhaps wouldn't be possible
Yeah.
otherwise?
Uh, so slopes and gradients, a ground screw naturally takes up f- gradients of up to 400 millimeters.
Okay.
So undulations in the ground, we just don't have to grade that off with the excavator. We could just go straight into that ground and still create a level plane for the pod to sit on. With more um, steeper elevations than that, we have extensions that we can put on top of the ground screws, and it'll go up and support. Or we can have a connector on top of a ground screw and then change it out into timber, which can then go up with timber legs. We can use 6x6 or 8x8 timber legs and have a more aesthetically pleasing support leg going up into the bottom of the framework for the pod. So they're a little bit more adaptable and less costly.
Yeah, really helpful solution because it opens up potential plots of land that otherwise potentially people might have ruled out just due to the kind of amount of work in having to flatten the ground and prep the ground. So it's fantastic that there's a few different ways to skin a cat on that front.
Absolutely. I was actually on a site last week where the client had put somewhere in the region of 1,000 tons of hardcore
Wow.
to flatten out the back end of a hill so he could place his pods. Where all we had to do was put the ground screws in and extend the legs up, and it would have supported it.
Yeah, it's one of those you go, do I tell him?
But
Do I not?
there's,
The job's done now, I suppose.
yeah, I never said anything. I just didn't say
Probably for
anything.
the
But
best.
there's an example where early consultation can come in handy when you're looking at the site and how you're going to deal with it. Early consultation will let you know that there's a cheaper option,
Yeah.
and we can look at
I
other options for these things.
can't stress that importantly enough. Not just on the kind of groundworks front, but utilities, pods, absolutely anything you're going to be spending some money on. Do your homework early is the message that keeps coming through episode after episode, no matter who we get on. So yeah, absolutely. Again, details down in the description. Give the man a call. You might save yourself quite a bit of money. So we touched briefly earlier on the fact that you also work with some kind of green energy solutions and some more kind of eco-friendly elements to these glamping sites, and that is a subject that is being raised more and more often now by our clients, and they're increasingly popular when people are searching for places to stay as well. They are actively looking for uh, a green resort, if you like, for lack of a better term. So,
Hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about the kind of off-grid solutions and eco-friendly options that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is solar. I do a lot of solar installation where we're putting in the ground screws for that, and then we're doing the arrays and all the infrastructure for it. And a lot of people sometimes shy away from solar because they're saying, well, it's not the solution. You know, we live in Scotland, for instance, in the
Yeah,
northern Scotland, and how much daylight do we get? But I think it should always be included within your plan, even if it's a percentage of the
yeah,
input that you're getting. It's certainly a cost saver for one, but it's an attraction. It's an eco-friendly solution, and if you're overproducing, you can put back in the grid and you can get some money from there. And if you're underproducing, then you are back on the grid and maybe the costs balance out in some
hmm
locations. And if not, then at least you're still getting benefit when the sun is shining or the day is bright. It doesn't need absolute sunshine on them. We just need daylight.
But I think a phased kind of combined approach is something that makes all the sense in the world now for a lot of clients, because we see very few that can rely entirely on a renewable energy source. So it's good to hear that you can have that kind of combination and that can work efficiently.
Yeah, but as time goes on, I was going to say, as time goes on, the technology is getting better and better. So some people's idea of how effective a solution may be might be 2, 3 years old, and within that time, it's advanced hugely,
Yeah.
and is always worth looking back into. Even if you looked at something 6 months ago, technology can just progress so quickly nowadays.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, we see it every day in our day-to-day items like iPhones and smart gadgets and fridges that order your shopping for you, and it's just the same with every other industry. The pace of change over the last few years is absolutely bonkers. So speak to the experts. Make sure you're getting some up-to-date information, because Google can only take you so far if you don't know what to Google. So really important to engage people as quickly as you can.
Exactly, and I don't pretend to be an expert in all these fields. We know how to install them, and we know the practicality of putting them into your site. But what we have are a number of service partners that we will put you onto, whether it be media and communication you're looking for, the solar, the EV charging, all these sort of things. We've got these service partners lined up, and we'll put you onto them and let you speak to the expert in that field.
Fantastic. Yeah, EV charging is again something that is only going to be more and more sought after over the coming years. Whilst the range of these vehicles is improving massively, range anxiety is a real thing, and people do want the comfort of knowing they can charge their vehicle up when they get to where they're going. So, really important to touch on all those sorts of elements. The way we like to kind of wrap most episodes up is to try and get a bit of a nugget of wisdom out of each of our guests. So, what would you say are kind of the most common hurdles or issues that you run into on a client site, and how would you suggest that that's kind of tackled?
I think we've touched on the thing is early planning and understanding the budgets.
Hmm.
Nearly every customer I quote up, they're always asking to claw back. They have a particular budget that they want to hit. When we produce the numbers to do the installation, then the reality comes out and we have to then start clawing back. Whereas if a little bit more homework was done and the consultation was maybe done a little bit earlier, um, again within the design, we had one recently where there was an obvious high cost, and we were talking about aluminium decking and framing and
Right.
everything outside the front. Was we just quickly stripped that back to a traditional timber frame and some composite decking, and I think an overall over 3 pods we saved in the region of £10,000
Wow.
because of the size of the deckings. So there's easy ways to bring the budget back in without actually upsetting much of the plan. Still keep the main idea of the design. And I think it is just I think the other part is just researching what available materials there are to achieve what it is that you want, the image you want to portray, the environment you want to provide, and have a look at all the different materials. As we touched on earlier, everything develops so quickly. Slightly older people, we're thinking it's all just timber decking, and it's if you go out and you look, you see what is actually available now with the uses of aluminium, composite materials, hardwoods. Everything is much more available, and pretty much what you can dream up is doable. But again, harps back to a budget.
Yeah, really good point. I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. Is that ultimately, no matter what the customer vision is, there will be someone out there who can make that a reality for you. But no one's naive enough to think they're not going to run into a hurdle somewhere. So the quicker you can have these conversations, the quicker we can get contingency plans in place and make sure that your project becomes a reality rather than just a broken dream, if you like.
I also think that some people look at a piece of land and think it's a no go because of the isolation of it,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it's more and more common to be looking at boreholes now and bringing your own water in, looking at water coming off streams. We've got a job running right now where we're taking the water off the back of Ben Nevis, and that's going into a treatment plant, and it'll go down into the pods following the treatment plant, a little storage, water storage tank, and then fed down into the pods. So regardless of the location, there's always a way nowadays is to make that happen and to have acceptance through the planning that you're going to have the proper standards and numbers that are going to be coming in. Sorry, I'm getting a bit lost at what I'm saying there.
No, I think you're spot on. Boreholes is again a conversation that comes up more and more often because we've seen a real pattern with planners that whilst they want you to be nearby to a town or some sort of public services, they don't like you to be right on the border. So getting access to those utilities is a really important part of the project. Um, Power tends to be fairly straightforward one way or the other, but water is really the trickier hurdle to jump for many clients. So it's fantastic to hear that there are solutions that don't necessarily rely on the mains. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for taking your time, Gary. As I said, give the man a call, drop him an email. We'll put all of his details below. We'd love to cover more in these podcasts, but we do try and keep them short and snappy so that people can listen to them on their way to work or in the car or whatever they might be up to. There's a font of knowledge there, so don't hesitate to reach out and make use of the man's experience. Gary, thank you very much for joining us.